Like, honestly, I don't actually know what potash is.
Potash is very important to North Vancouver at Neptune. It's like a red dust.
I got nothing. It's a thing that we have in Saskatchewan.
There's a lot of... It's a potassium compound that's used in fertilizers.
I know what potassium is.
It's in bananas.
Yeah, I eat a lot of those.
It might mulch you to make potash then.
Isn't potash mined, not mulched?
The idea that... Whatever. Shut up.
Welcome to Pod Keep Our Land.
It's what Tommy Douglas would have listened to.
We are a show about Canadian politics, parliaments, policy, and politicians. I'm your host, Erin Rennie.
I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Patrick Meehan.
And today on the show, we're going to be talking about BC. We'll do a little update on British Columbia politics. Next, we'll be talking about the Trans Mountain Pipeline and Kinder Morgan. From there, we'll go into a bit of a debate about infrastructure megaprojects in Canada, pro or con. And from there, we're going to go to Saskatchewan and hear what's going on.
In the land of living skies.
In the land of living skies, in the home of Tommy Douglas. So let's start with BC. A lot of things have been happening in BC over the last few months, of course, and that pace has not stopped since our last episode. Christy Clark has stepped down.
Mm-hmm. A vacancy has arisen, which means that the Horgan government is safe from the flu for a little while.
Yeah, at least 6 months, and then possibly longer.
Right, because the NDP is going to win Kelowna West Side.
Oh, no, sorry. Possibly longer, as in the Liberal Party will maybe still in the throes of a leadership race, maybe still going through the process of getting to a point where they can actually try to take down a government.
Yes, okay, that does make more sense.
Yeah, I think, or even, potentially Speaker Linda Reid.
Right.
It's not the worst idea. I think Linda Reid's been a pretty good speaker before, and she could be again. Yeah.
Right.
She can always step down.
So with one fewer MLA on opposition benches, that means the government is safe for a little while, at least, and so they can start to plan and make some policy movements. One of the first orders of business has been to relieve the heads of different crown corporations of their duties because they are often, what would you say, politically entangled.
I think you want to make sure that the heads of your crown corporations are people that you can work with, and it just so happens to be the people you can work with are people you tend to owe favors to.
Right. So we've been hearing a lot about ICBC getting a new CEO and
BC Hydro.
Well,
I think Jesse McDonald is gone. And
it should be noted too that like I make a joke about it, but I think that at the end of the day, these people are people that can and should be connected with the government in some way, so that they work with them, right? The outgoing ICBC chair was Colin Hanson, who was a longtime finance minister in British Columbia under the Liberal Party, and now it's Joy McPhail, who was a longtime cabinet minister under the NDP in the 90s. It's really, that's sort of the way these things work.
Right.
Crown corporations are like the government. They're semi-part of the government, but they're not the government. It doesn't mean the government should have no control over them. Mm-hmm. They're still kind of agents of political power in the province.
Yeah.
And one of those people, Gordon Wilson, whose name is back in the headlines after a bit of a hiatus.
The man,
30 years of BC politics.
The man has been
around.
influencing politics in BC from all sides of the legislature for 30 years. It's the most bizarre. Just go to his Wikipedia page. Seriously, he is the most bizarre man in BC politics.
So Premier Horgan let Gordon Wilson go.
He was the head of the LNG for BC thing. Yeah, whatever. It was a non-governmental semi-governmental organization that was designed to promote the LNG industry in BC, and the NDP not being as in favor of the LNG project as the BC Liberals,
or of Gordon Wilson himself either.
Well, I wonder why that would be. Check his Wikipedia page. So strange. He has been let go from his position in a way that probably could have been handled better.
Yeah, it's funny because usually, I mean, you fire these people and you're pretty happy to fire them because they're the other guy's bagmen. But you usually don't also run their name through the mud at the same time you fire them.
I think it was Von Palmer who described this whole episode as a drive-by sliming.
Especially when you slime, that is such a weird phrase, but especially when you slime him in a way that is not valid or true, it turns out.
So what happened was NDP Finance Minister Bruce Ralston fired him, and in the firing said that Gordon Wilson had not produced a single page of reports or documents to justify his tenure as the head of this LNG for BC coalition thingy. Mm-hmm. And Premier Horgan doubled down on this the same day when he was asked, and I would expect that there's going to be some civil action in the BC Supreme Court over this, because that turns out to be, one, false, and two, like, dumbly false.
Yeah, so I guess what ended up happening was in 2015, a researcher for the NDP put in a FOI, a Freedom of Information Act request for any files or documents or reports written by Gordon Wilson, and they got it back, and it was 180 pages of reports that they got back. So not only had he written a bunch of reports, he'd written quite a few of them, and the party research arm had actually been given those reports 2 years ago.
Unforced error.
Yeah, I think it was. I think there's been a lot of Gordon Wilson and his partner Judy Tabji are very much disliked within the NDP, and I think they viewed him as being somebody that they really wanted to slag, and they took the chance.
And that was stupid, because
really
now the
stupid.
government is going to get sued. Like, it's going to get sued, and it's going to cost us hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in court fees and a settlement. Like, if the NDP is smart, they will try and settle this as quickly as possible out of court.
And let's be clear, firing him was exactly what everybody knew was going to happen. He knew it was going to happen.
Firing him was fine.
It was silly.
It's the dumb thing afterwards where you just, like, rub someone's name through the mud. That's bad. It's just bad.
When you can just let your supporters do it anyways. They're going to.
Yeah, but they're not, like, exposing the problem.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Is you ride above the waves, right?
All right, but it's a short story, and
Are those 180 pages ever going to get released to the public?
There is an FOI that is publicly accessible. I haven't taken a look at it, so I don't know how much of it's redacted and whited out. BC likes to white out its FOIs, so it doesn't look like they're covering things up. Normally, redactions, we think of them as being black covering. Somebody realized a long time ago that if you white it out instead, it makes the page just look blank, like there was nothing there ever.
Interesting. Okay, well, other things that we've heard from the new BC government, reintroduction of adult basic education for free.
Yeah, this is something that I actually, in my professional work, had advocated for. This is the most bizarre and ideological thing that I think has happened. One of the most ideological things that came out of this government. In 2002, they made it. They started charging for basic education, which is getting your high school. Really, if you didn't have your high school and you need to go back, we shouldn't be charging you for it. Then they determined in 2007 that had been a mistake and that it was actually harming the economy.
So this is what I had thought. I'm like, when I heard that they reintroduced free adult basic education, I'm like, didn't the BC Liberals do this?
Yeah.
But it turns out that they did, and then they undid it because occasionally we are seized by stupid.
Well, I think it's the kind of thing that it's an ideological imperative to do. Is there's people within the party that view it as being something you should charge for. Is that if you didn't get your high school when you had the chance, well, now it's going to hurt. And I think that view is really ugly, and so we've gone away from it, and our society is better for it.
Are they going to increase funding to the school districts to pay for it?
Yeah, most of it's done through post-secondary education, actually, that the post-secondary institutes run a series of, English as a second language or English as an additional language, as it's now being called, as well as, basic maths, English, things like that. They're usually course numbers that are alien to somebody who's gone through post-secondary because they don't use the same numbering system. And so the provincial government will backfill the costs of that, essentially. I did some estimates of it for work purposes at about $7.5 million a year is what it's going to cost, which is pennies.
Well, it's not.
It's like literally not pennies.
Let's because they don't exist anymore. But
yeah, pennies.
let's there is a cost to it,
but the cost is really quite negligible.
I mean, like $7 million can buy an affordable housing complex and a small one, but like
12 or 15 units.
Yeah, but like these are resource allocations that like have merit, and so let's not be flip about those kinds of things.
Fair.
And the economic spin-off of people getting education or being able to speak and read in English is going to far outweigh that $7 million.
Oh yeah, I think it's a good idea. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think we should be like cavalier about government spending.
Sure.
Fair.
Right. Well, speaking of government spending, let's move on to our next topic. Trans Mountain Pipeline. This has been in the news for a very, very long time. Debate about twinning the pipeline from Edmonton to Burnaby. And that's Kinder Morgan's project that they've been pushing for a very long time. Also of keen interest to the province of Alberta that wants to get their oil to market. This is a $7.4 billion project, but the people who live on the coast of BC are not as happy about it. It just received the permit from the federal government, and we just heard this week that BC NDP government are going to join the legal challenges against the Trans Mountain Pipeline. What do you guys think?
So, some background on the legal challenge issue. They are seeking intervener status in some of the challenges that are being brought to the Supreme Court in order to try and effectively block this pipeline.
And to be clear, intervener status is?
Yes, intervener status is a thing that people who don't have a direct interest in the issue at hand, who aren't directly impacted by it, i.e. they don't have like the typical form of standing that you are required to be a party to a lawsuit, they can seek intervener status because they have this sort of tangential relationship to the issue that is being discussed, and so the Supreme Court lets them give like 5-minute oral submissions and a 10-page brief.
Yeah, so especially because, when cases are going to really affect you even if you're not directly related to it, right? And so, a lot of First Nations groups have applied for intervener status. The province of Alberta has applied for intervener status in favor of the pipeline, and now the fellow NDP government of British Columbia is going to apply in opposition to the pipeline.
We're so angry that this is going to make us money. So angry. It's bothersome, I have to say, and I know that this was part of the Green NDP coalition agreement, where they said that they would use every legal avenue open to them to try and block this pipeline because, I don't know, the Greens didn't
because they like the environment and they want a future for humanity.
Not going to change any of those things. So the problem with this, and I have to give props to David Eby for saying recently, I know, the stomach turns, that he can't, one of the suggestions for blocking this project was for BC to deny approval of permits. And David Eby came out recently and said, we can't do that. We can't just deny the permits that are going to be required to build these pipelines, which include things like
access road, clearing a field, that kind of thing,
because those have standards of review and can be overturned by the courts, and the government has to behave in a predictable and normal manner, and if they just started arbitrarily declining these things, the government's going to get sued and those decisions are going to get overturned, and that would be bad. So this is them seeking a different pathway to trying to block this project.
Right, because the feds have already said it's going ahead, and they have jurisdiction here, right?
Yes. So interprovincial pipelines are a federal jurisdiction. And so one thing that should be clear about this is that if he wanted to, Justin Trudeau can make this pipeline happen. It is a question of spending political capital and social capital, but it's in his court.
It would be very difficult for him to do it, I think, politically. I think there'd be a host of Vancouver area MPs who would not win re-election over it.
Yeah, except he's already effectively made that call.
He's making it clear that he's going to allow it to go through, but there's things he could do to expedite the process, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. But people like Beach and Murray and Fry, those three in particular, have voted against this when it came up in the House.
And so I generally oppose Kinder Morgan because of environmental and climate change reasons. I'm glad the government's doing it. I think that it's a pipeline that we don't need. I think we need to focus on getting off of oil, and expanding allowing the expansion of fossil fuel extraction is, I think, dangerous for not just the local environment, but also just human civilization.
And I think that is an absolutely wrong-headed and misguided approach to the topic, because our consumption of oil is entirely a demand-side problem, and the fact that we are producing more or less of it isn't going to change the global demand at all.
But you're a supporter of the carbon tax, which lays a price on carbon and reduces demand.
Which is a demand-side fixing problem.
Well, but the thing is that by allowing these pipelines to go through and expanding the pipelines, it decreases the cost of oil because it increases the supply and decreases the price of getting it to market.
The amount of oil that's going to be produced by these things isn't going to have very much impact on the global price of oil one way or the other. That is almost entirely determined by the OPEC cartel. The amount of oil that we are able to produce in the oil sands and ship to BC, for one thing, we don't have enough oil in the Lower Mainland to meet our own supply. We have to bring oil up from the States to fill our refining capacity, which has been declining over the past couple of decades as refineries close in the Lower Mainland. We don't have enough oil to fulfill the jet fuel needs at Vancouver International. We don't have enough oil to fulfill the gasoline needs of our cars. That may not be an issue for as long as we might think, but there are reasons to bring oil into Vancouver from the rest of Canada. And also, the idea that a province should be able to block another province's access to tidewater is really troubling to me. We should be able to trade.
So if Canada has such a supply problem when it comes to getting oil, why is it so important to ship it overseas?
Well, we have a supply... We don't have a supply problem. We have a distribution problem.
Because I think the idea is that Kinder Morgan is going to allow Alberta oil to be sold at a higher price to international markets than is being able to be sold right now in American markets, because Americans know that oil can't get outside of their markets.
Yeah, so what we're selling our oil at right now is the North American spot price. Mm-hmm. And if we are able to get it to tidewater, we will be able to sell that oil at the international price to markets in Asia or South America or wherever we can ship our oil.
Who benefits from those higher prices?
The Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers, theoretically, or Suncor, or Total, or the other investors that are engaged in oil extraction in the oil sands, and tangentially the BC and Alberta governments, and by extension their citizens.
But the other thing, though, is that BC is being asked to take on all the risk of various problems with none of the direct economic benefits of the pipeline. Because while there are jobs in building the pipeline, there's 12 jobs in actually operating it that are going to stay in BC, and I think they're actually moving them to Alberta anyways. And yet you're opening up the coastal waters to significant risks of oil slicks. You're opening up the land across British Columbia to the various spills that pipelines occur. Pipelines have spills all the time, and not just old pipelines, new pipelines do too, all the time. And that's significant damage to local environments.
Although a substantial amount of those spills end up being less than a liter. Every single spill gets reported on
hundreds of liters spilled in that pipeline just 8 years ago in Burnaby. Hundreds, it was thousands of liters. It was a plume of oil going 30 feet in the sky.
But this is a question that is on regulation of the pipeline companies. Whenever people bring up whether or not pipelines are safe, I want to remind them that the oil is still getting out here, and it's causing other problems in our economy. The Great Canadian Grain Crisis, where grain was backed up in silos across the prairies because we couldn't get it out to the Pacific ports because the rail companies were shipping oil, that was causing serious problems for farmers.
But also rail-based transportation of oil has substantially declined in that since then.
Yes, but that's because they ordered them to do it. But rail-based transportation is incredibly dangerous, and oil will find a way to market. It's becoming less and less
frequent. It's been dropping and dropping and dropping since the issue you raised happened.
Well, that, and when a oil train blew up
Yes, in Lac-Mégantic, yes.
And so we got a little shy about that. But like it's gonna happen again, especially when the price of oil starts to rise again. There is going to be more oil train shipping if we aren't able to transport oil. Oil is dangerous.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly necessary for our global economy.
We need to stop using it.
And that is a demand side problem that is entirely unconnected to whether we produce oil in the oil sands or not.
What about the problem of induced demand?
I don't really buy it. Like, I think that induced demand is something that really works for traffic, but it's not.
Your argument is that other countries are producing enough oil that our supply isn't going to affect anything, which is the same people that say that Canada shouldn't do anything for climate change because we are a small emitter. Like, everybody needs to work together to reduce the supply and the demand of oil on both sides of that equation.
I think that reducing the supply of oil is not going to change the problem at all. It is absolutely not going to solve the problem in any way. The demand problem is going to change it.
If supply were to reduce, what would happen to price?
If the supply, it would go up. But like,
what would happen to demand?
It would stay exactly the same.
You're saying
that is what happened in the 1970s.
No,
people were lined up for hours at gas stations.
And Volkswagen put out a car that could do 100 miles in a gallon because that's when prices went up. That's when significant expansion in efficiency went up.
Yes, and we can actually manipulate that by having carbon taxes, by having fuel taxes.
Agreed.
We don't have to completely handicap our economy by saying
How
that
does it
we're
handicap our economy?
We sell resources in this country. We extract these resources and we use them to fuel this like rather generous welfare state that we have all come to know and love and support.
And it's time to start really transitioning away from that because we can't always be a resource extractor.
All right. Well, like until then, I think that we still have this resource that we can sell to the world. Then they're going to get somewhere else anyway. So why not make the money ourselves?
I think I just don't buy the argument that if somebody else is going to do it anyways, we should be the ones to do it.
You don't have to buy it. Someone else is going to.
Why does Prime Minister Trudeau support this project?
Like, I think for basically the reasons that I have been outlining.
Okay.
I'm drawing some of these from a Invest in Canada pamphlet that the Ministry of Global Affairs has put out with this kind of creepy picture of Chrystia Freeland on it, and then another creepier picture of like a painted face with like the close up of the eyes.
But I think the other thing to think about too is the other lens on this is also First Nations agreements and First Nations actual agreement by First Nations for the use of their land, and it's an interesting one because there is an agreement with every First Nations group whose land or land claims the pipeline is going to go through, but all of the First Nations groups whose waterways the oil is going to go through or whose waterways the oil is going to be loaded onto boats from, their traditional waterways have not been consulted and have not been engaged with. So the Tsleil-Waututh and the Musqueam and the Squamish First Nations, for example, have applied as intervener status to oppose the pipeline because it's their traditional waterways that are going to be where this oil will be flowing in through boats.
And I actually don't know what the Supreme Court is going to say on that. And there does need to be...
It's a very interesting idea, is the idea that we have an obligation to consult when it comes to the land, but not the traditional waterways. And that when it comes to, First Nations history, and not just like spiritual, but also like real life history of the waterways were life, that becomes a real interesting question.
But this is grounded in the jurisprudence on the issue already.
Yes.
Like, there is a duty to consult on title. And you know what? I think we do have to say about Kinder Morgan that they did a way better job than Enbridge in communicating and engaging with the First Nations along the route.
With the legally mandated First Nations. They completely ignored the ones whose waterways the oil will go through.
Well, like...
Because they didn't have a legal obligation at the time.
There should be a legal obligation for a company to do things. We can't expect companies to follow laws that don't exist.
No, fair enough, right? And I think that's the interesting one that's going to come down in these court proceedings is this like idea of what is a duty to consult when it comes to waterways.
It seems like what we have building here is a bit of a war of wills, where BC government now can employ different policy tools that you've discussed, such as sort of delaying the permitting process to slow the project long enough that it will become uneconomical for the company company to move forward, or it will be too expensive in terms of political capital for the federal government to continue to push on this. Who do you think is going to win that war of wills? Who's going to be more tenacious?
I think Justin Trudeau is going to win.
Yeah, I think the pipeline will get built. I hope it doesn't. I don't support the pipeline as I've outlined, but I think it gets built. Yeah.
But like in general, I think the sort of war of wills and kind of general opposition to large projects is a bigger problem that we need to take a broader look at as a society and as a country and as a set of governments, because we aren't building anymore, and we are experiencing a large exodus of foreign direct investment into our economy, which is going to hurt our economy. We saw Petronas leave up in the north.
Yay.
It is an absolute tragedy for BC that has happened. $36
Great
billion
for human civilization.
$36 billion investment for a transition fuel that would have helped us get us off oil.
It's not a transition fuel. It's a garbage fuel that we shouldn't be using in the first place. And we're getting off it was going to get China off coal was what it was going to do.
But you're against every single type of okay, well that's our Site C Clean Power project. No?
I don't think it's power that we need.
All right. I mean, like most of BC's energy most of BC's energy is comes from fossil fuels. That includes the cars, heating.
I also think that a $12 or $15 or $16 billion dam is way more money to create that power than the renewable sources that we have available right now, let alone in 3 to 5 years with the rate of change in the price of renewable development.
All right, Patrick has extrapolated those numbers from some estimates, but that's not the budgeted course. The budget
is $9 billion, and a comprehensive study of hydroelectric dams in North America that came out last year stipulated that on average they come in 100% over budget.
Well, that's not what the reports that I've been looking at have said. They've said about 45%, but I think that is a perfectly reasonable price to pay for a hydroelectric dam. We've got these we have this problem where we're not able to provide a reliable business environment for these investments to get made, because the fact that the Kinder Morgan pipeline was an issue in both the 2013 and 2017 elections is a little mind-boggling to me. I think we should be able to have an election about something and then build the project.
I think governments should be able to do things. I think both would agree with that. Yeah,
they should be able to do things, and we should be able to build a new hospital or a new pipeline or a new highway or a new railway without wringing our hands about it for 15 years, which is what some of these projects have been doing. Muskrat Falls, I don't know how long Muskrat Falls has been.
I also think Muskrat Falls is a giant boondoggle.
I haven't, every single project.
So we're on our third topic here, which is infrastructure mega projects. But Matthew, it sounds like the kinds of projects you're talking about are projects where a private company has an interest in making money extracting resources from Canadian territory, and their investment is in building the means to extract that resource that they would then sell or refine somehow and then sell for their own benefit. Why is it in Canada's interest to make it a good place for those companies to be able to do that?
Well, because
how does Canada benefit from that?
We collect a lot of royalty money from resource extraction, or stumpage fees being fees for the creation of stumps,
cutting down trees.
Or other resource royalty situations. I'm perfectly happy, by the way, to take a look at other mechanisms. I'm not really that sold on the public-private partnership model because it has not worked out very well for the bridge structures,
or hydro's run-of-river projects that were experimented with in the mid-2000s that cost way more money per kilowatt than a building, for example. P3s, I think you're right, have been fairly difficult to sell.
Yeah, but I think that there are... We're against both run-of-river and big hydroelectric dams. We're against all dams.
I'm not against all projects. You know that.
Yeah, I know you're not. It just seems that way.
And I feel like these projects should be in different categories. There's the category of of taking resource or value out of the environment and selling it, and then there's public infrastructure projects like creating power to sell to your people, or building a bridge that your people will use. Like, shouldn't we evaluate those projects separately?
Well, like, I think that they're both creating a resource that can be sold, and I think that, like, Statoil in Norway has, the ability to provide oil for its citizenry and also sell oil to the world, and so I'm not particularly opposed to a corporate structure that involves a, like, substantial amount of government control over resource extraction, but it's still going to require a certain amount of foreign direct investment, or foreign investment in some form, for these types of projects to get built. Like, we just we have these, like, low interest rates, and that can be used to float bonds that are able to provide us with, like, that capital, but sometimes it just requires foreign investment.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with you on the foreign direct investment front, but I think that I do agree that what we have is a sort of a paralyzed government in Canada at all levels to stay away from doing expansive big ideas. We used to have governments that did big ideas, right? They went to the moon. They did all the things in the 60s and 70s. And I mean, personally, I blame Ronald Reagan, like I do for most problems, is that I think Ronald Reagan really brought about a public shift in the way we view government towards an idea that government isn't good and government can't do. And I think that we're all at this table agreed that, like, government should be a force of good and should be, building massive expansion in public transit infrastructure. They should be building, high-speed rail lines. They should be building these projects, but for some reason they don't want to.
Yeah, and I think that, like, stems back to this idea of this sort of unambitious government, and we totally need to break ourselves from that, because there are problems that are going to be confronting us in the next 50 years that are only going to be able to be solved by, like, massive government action. I don't think that there is any institution that is going to be singularly large enough to confront these problems other than a government.
Like, a carbon tax is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to be part of the toolbox to do it, and governments are going to have to do a lot more than just a carbon tax to bring about the survival of our civilization.
Yeah, like, on that we can agree.
Yeah. At least we can agree that survival of human civilization is a good thing and governments should pursue it.
Yeah. I thought we were going to talk about, like, more like stimulus public infrastructure projects.
Well, I think the thing was that I was that's where I go, but I think philosophically Naylor goes towards private companies that burn oil. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything burns oil. Everything burns oil. We have an oil-based... But, like, to be honest, I think that the same kind of, like, angry, frothing-at-the-mouth opposition would exist to a high-speed rail line that would cut through a certain amount of land.
It would just be from a right-wing group, because they would oppose the expenditure of government dollars on people, rather than pipelines.
Or from a left, like, it's not an ideological thing. It's just that we're, like, opposed to doing stuff.
But I think it is ideological. Is when governments come up with major public infrastructure development that'll help people.
Sorry, I think
these right wing groups like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation will come out screaming, and they'll never talk about a government bailout to a corporation, and they'll never talk about a project that helps a corporation, like building out highways out to LNG projects and such like that.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a left-right ideological thing. That maybe that's what I should have said. Is that I don't think it's a left-right ideological thing. I think it's an ambitious government versus unambitious government type of program. And I think for all the things you can say about Christy Clark, she believed in, like, a form of ambitious government. We may disagree about, like, what her ambitions were, but
I think she wanted mega projects specifically to win elections.
Kind of seems like ambitious is another word for how much money are you willing to spend? Like, are you a government who's willing to spend a lot of money or environmental capital? And so in a lot of ways, like, investing in a transportation project requires you to take out a bunch of debt, but in allowing a resource extraction project to happen on your land also makes you go into sort of an environmental debt. You have to pay for the remediation of that land, or you lose habitat or some other kind of ecological function. So
I mean, like, we built the railway by just sort of like saying to CN, you get a chunk of land on either side of the railway that you are able to sell.
It's a subsidy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
Well, I mean,
leaving aside that that land belonged to other people.
Like, resource extraction is substantially subsidized to a level that's well above and beyond what the royalties bring in, and even more if you count the environmental impacts post the resource extraction. Is mines don't clean themselves up when they close down,
which is an argument for like a different economic model to do it.
Yeah, these resource extractions are really short-term gain, long-term pain, because we're going to build a pile of infrastructure to support them at our dime. Then they're going to build their thing. Then they're going to leave the place in ruins, and you're stuck with the cleanup.
Yeah.
But again, I do think that we still have this problem where, like, we don't have the mental capacity to, like, wrap our heads around these big projects anymore. Yeah. And I think that's what really needs to change. Mm-hmm. Like, whether it's building, like, a giant new hospital or a very expensive high-speed rail line, which our country is gigantic, it's going to be very expensive, but we have to do it.
I don't think anyone's going to build a transcontinental high-speed rail line.
I mean, it's going to get built eventually.
I don't think that's in the cards, but I think getting them between major cities is just a must.
Yeah, I wasn't like suggesting it be built from like L'Orange to, the Pas. Like there should be, there should be some planning associated with this. But like Edmonton to Calgary to Regina to Saskatoon to Winnipeg, maybe not that exact route, but but connecting the party cities with the Windsor.
We don't do major things that help people. Is I think the thing is that we don't do major builds anymore,
and we do have to like bring in money somehow to like pay for this stuff. I mean, resource extraction is currently the way that we've been doing that.
Do you think it has to do with like 4 or 5 year term limits?
Yeah.
It's hard to think big when you're thinking about the next election, which could be 18 months from now or 6 months from now in the case of BC.
It didn't seem to stop us before, but I think politics changed. Like, it didn't seem to stop us. We always had 4 or 5 year term limits.
Right.
And we used to do mega projects. Mm-hmm. But I think that something has changed in our faith in government as a population. And so governments no longer try big projects.
Because once you have a boondoggle in your hands, you're never going to get reelected again, at least.
Yeah, and I think that during the starting process of a project, it's going to cost money, and people aren't going to see the benefits right away, and then people are going to get angry because the government is wasting your money again, because we have this false belief that governments waste money.
Well, the last truly ambitious government that we had at a national level was Brian Mulroney's, and like he had a kind of legal ambition in trying to bring Quebec into the Constitution and fix like some of the errors and omissions that were in Trudeau's version of the document, but like that turned into two brutal knockdown drag out fights.
Yep.
And they like broke the spirit of the Tory party and reduced them to 2 seats, and then the Liberals became Tory light for a little while, and now we're here.
It's almost like, okay, I'm getting a little psychological here, but it's almost like a vulnerability problem. Like governments are maybe afraid of failure, and we don't accept failure as much as maybe we once did, and so we're less willing to take risks that a big infrastructure or big mega project would entail.
I think that's insightful and correct.
Yeah.
Well, Premier Brad Wall, who has been the Premier of Saskatchewan for the last 10 years, resigned this week.
We now don't have a premier in Canada that's been around for more than 5 years of a province.
Interesting. Yeah. It's a new era.
Who's the longest serving premier at this point?
Technically Northwest Territories, but in terms of the provinces, I would guess Kathleen Wynne.
That is remarkable.
It is remarkable.
It seems like she just got into power.
Yeah. Don't tell that to the Ontario Tories. They think she's been there forever.
So Brad Wall has said he is retiring from politics altogether. He's only 51, which is the age that a lot of politicians go into politics. So that's pretty remarkable. He's had quite a career with the Saskatchewan Party. What do you think his legacy is going to be?
Getting taken for a ride by resource extraction companies. I think handing away handing away Saskatchewan's resources for a song and getting very little return out of it.
I don't know. I just know he was more popular than God for quite a while.
Like, he was legitimately the most popular premier by a long shot.
He seemed to really turn the province around.
Well, I don't know. Saskatchewan only chases governments when times are good. So, like, he inherited quite a good situation that Premier Calvert had left him. And I think that Wall kind of revitalized a kind of spirit in Saskatchewan. Like Saskatchewan, I think, had a bit of a doldrum complex, and really kind of picked up under his leadership.
Can I say that his party is a really silly name? Is the Saskatchewan Party is a really silly name? Like, it gives you no indication of where they stand on anything.
Ah, brilliant.
Yes. But yeah, he's retired. He was very much reviled by the left in Canada for a long time. He hollowed out the government by making very severe cuts to a lot of things over the years. And in a lot of ways still managed a huge deficit. Somehow he cut everything that they were spending money on and still ended up in a huge deficit.
It's because he bet everything on resource extraction and then prices collapsed.
Yep.
So it's almost like you need a somewhat separate tax base in order to continue.
Yeah.
Which is what BC has done with housing, which will never be a problem.
It will never be a problem.
So the deficit in Saskatchewan right now is $1.3 billion. That's nothing to sneeze at.
$1 million per Saskatchewan resident? Or is that $1,000 per resident of Saskatchewan?
Oh, damn.
There's only 1 million Saskatchewanites. Anyways, there's only 1 million of them. If they got $1 billion deficit, that's a lot of deficit.
Right. So, and as you mentioned, they've had to cut a lot of their services, including just recently the Saskatchewan Transportation Company, which was the interurban and rural transportation agency in the province that has operated for the last 50 odd years, and they hardly gave any notice at all. They notified that they were going to cease operations entirely in the whole province in March and closed operations in May.
Well, and Saskatchewan's really spread out is the thing. It's got a lot of very small communities, and so people have to get around between them. And I mean, it's 1 million people. Only 500,000 of them live between Saskatoon and Regina, which means that the other 500,000 are just spread across the province. And that means families are in different communities that spread all over the place, and they need to get there somehow. And if you don't have a car, how are you going to do that?
I mean, the Saskatchewan Transportation Service, that was the answer beforehand, and now hitchhiking.
Yeah.
Which
I mean, in BC, we have a really close relationship with the Trail of Tears, where that was exactly what was going on. And one of the solutions that came out of that was to institute a bus service, which now operates.
Yeah.
Highway of Tears.
Oh, sorry. Highway of Tears. Trail of Tears, that was something else.
Yeah.
Similar situation, though.
No. But, both sad things.
Yeah.
Sadness. Right. So this cut is having a lot of implications, and a lot of people are very concerned because hitchhiking is dangerous. We have a very serious problem of missing and murdered Aboriginal women in Canada, and a lot of times that's related to hitchhiking, and of course racism and sexism.
The thing that absolutely drives me bonkers is that this won't save a substantial amount of money. They're spending the most generous amount that I was able to find in terms of the numbers was $17 million that this is going to save.
Didn't you just tell me earlier that $7 million was a lot of money?
I'm saying that we should be conscious of how much we are spending, but $17 million versus the cost. I was in favor of the other thing.
Oh no, I thought it was funny.
The $17 million or $11 million is the least conservative estimate. That is not going to make a huge dent in the $1 billion or $600 million or however big the Saskatchewan deficit is. And I think that the human cost is going to be much more substantial than what is going to happen, especially if we end up having to prosecute murderers, which I think is going to happen. And murder trials are very expensive.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just destructive on people that are already highly at risk. This is a government policy that, and you see this a lot in the modern political realm, is when you make cuts to people who don't complain, and people who don't complain are people at risk, and people that are poor, and people that are now more at risk than they were before. And I think that's really damaging.
It's a really tough case, and I hope we don't see this happening in other places. It's difficult to run a transportation company or bus routes in low density areas, you end up with a lot of empty seats, and that's a problem. And if you're a taxpayer and you're looking at the deficit and you're thinking, how much subsidy are we providing to this bus service, you might start to have questions. But it's like you said, it's all a matter of how much are you willing to pay for the other social benefits like public safety that come from having a robust public transportation system.
Oh, but fear not, because a flooring company is to the rescue.
A flooring company.
A flooring company, a numbered Saskatchewan company that normally does flooring installations, has applied to the regulatory body responsible for regulating highways and road transport in Saskatchewan to provide bus services.
So there's going to be a for-profit bus service now running.
Well, I mean, like, there were Saskatchewan Transportation Service was a like subsidized thing, but they had two profitable routes.
They had two profitable routes.
They had two profitable routes.
One of them was from Regina to Saskatoon, I assume.
And I haven't, I guess so.
And there's a third city somewhere that they...
Moose Jaw exists.
Moose Jaw, there we go. Probably.
I'm betting. I don't know, Lloydminster? Who knows? There's a lot of money.
There's only half of them are in Saskatchewan.
Swift Current is a city.
It's Laurence to the Pot. It's that one.
Kandahar is also a place in Saskatchewan, as well as Uranium City and Atomic City. And
my favorite Saskatchewan town is Eyebrow.
No.
Yeah, I have a picture of myself under the. And I'm sorry, cousins. Like Alsace's a great place, but it's not as good a name as Eyebrow.
Anyway, what were we talking about?
Mantario, also quite good. Alsace is named after Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Oh, no, that's what they did, didn't they? It's Manitoba, Ontario, isn't it?
It's right next to Alsace. It's Alsace and then nearby Mantario.
Is Ontotoba taken?
Oh, I mean, probably.
That could be the name of a new transportation service.
Ontotoba? Ontotoba
right.
Transportation.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, anyways, public transit is, I think, something that we all agree should exist.
Like, the concern that they're having is that these private companies that are applying, there's been this flooring company, there's been this company that has operated some transportation beforehand that have all applied for permits to operate these lines. One is that they're going to leave some lines unserved.
Yeah.
And, like, Greyhound has, in other provinces, been required to operate lines as a condition of being able to operate other lines. So that might be something that the government could explore. The other problem is that those ticket prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
Like, they might be just like operating those like big school vans as opposed to a bus line, but I still think that it's going to be really difficult to operate that type of service without ticket prices going up, and that'll drive people to hitchhike.
Yep, it's a bad policy.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope we keep talking about transportation as an issue of decolonization and feminism, and what as I was reading about this issue, what it highlighted for me is we don't see feminist organizations arguing for better public transit or advocating for that. We don't, but those connections haven't really been highlighted until this case, and so I hope that some work continues on that front.
I think you're right. The progressive left hasn't made the public case for public transit the way that they should, because I think the case is there that one of the most progressive things you can do is invest in a better public transit system.
I don't think the right's made the case for public transit the way that they should, because like it should be a perfectly reasonable right-wing argument to make, to say that like this kind of investment will drive economic development in a region or a country or a province. And I think people have totally lost the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to stop thinking about politics. What have you guys been thinking about this week?
Dresses.
Dresses.
To go back to public transportation.
So in the public transportation and bus line research that I was doing for this topic, I came across a woman who was named Menya Stevenson, who has been engaged in an art project called Bus Tour in Germany. And she has asked all the different bus companies around Germany to send her swatches of fabric that are normally used to coat the seats of buses. And it's like this miraculous fabric that can hold a ton of dust and never degrades. And she has made some haute couture from these things, and you should look it up. Bus tour Menya Stevenson, Menja Stevenson. She's photographed herself on the buses wearing the dresses made from the bus fabric that are on those buses. It's so good, and you should look at
They
it.
must be so warm. Like, can you imagine wearing basically bus upholstery as a dress?
But I don't think they would ever stain.
No, it's true. Yeah, you could drop your coffee on yourself every day like I do, and you would be fine.
If only they still had a bus service in Saskatchewan, they could, match and stay warm in the cold winters.
Oh, I like that one. That's cool. Anyway,
They are really cute.
Patrick.
I'm going to give a shout out to another podcast. Is my partner, Erin, and her friend Rachel do a regular podcast called Tipsy Archives. And on the Tipsy Archives, they drink wine and talk about things that happened in history. And it's actually really quite entertaining. They recently got back from a tour of Europe that they took together. And as part of that tour, they podcasted in each of the cities they were in. And I would highly recommend everybody, wherever you get your podcasts, give a follow to the Tipsy Archives.
Awesome. Nice. What have I been thinking about? I've been thinking about maybe this might be political still. I've been thinking about reading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the entire thing, which is like a big deal for me because I'm a very slow reader. And so reading the whole thing would be like a year-long project. But
You should absolutely do it. I had to read it for law school. You should absolutely do it.
yeah,
I had to
it's a
read
good
it for work. There's a lot in there.
Like the whole 700 pages or whatever it is.
No, I didn't read 700
Okay.
pages of it.
You should start with the
I read about
executive summary.
yeah.
They have
like
it's like a 100 page
100-page
thing that they
Yeah.
Right. So there's this challenge on the internet, and there's this app set up for it, so you can track your progress as you read the whole thing all the way through.
Well, that sounds like a cool app.
And it
This is
sort
the-
of shares where you're at with your social media people, and I don't know. I think it looks really cool, so I'll let you know where I go with that.
All right. Well, we do have a call to action before we go. So we would like you to, if you can, dear listeners, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. It's been a really gratifying process producing this podcast. But if you could do one of three things, we would be very, very grateful. One, like us on Facebook. Two,
Rate and review us on your favorite podcasting app.
And three, reach out. Let us know if you're listening. You can contact us in person and let us know what you think.
statistics show that you probably know at least one of us.
Yeah, we had a listener reach out to talk to us recently about how much he was enjoying the podcast, and it was really neat to hear that somebody enjoyed it.
It was, we really appreciated it. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
More of this. Just come, tell us how much you like us. It's so nice. Or tell us if you don't like us and if you'd like to hear other things, because we're actually really quite interested in producing a quality product for you. So, stay tuned.
All right, you've been listening to Pod Keep Our Land. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
Cheers. Did you just wipe the whole podcast? It's what Tommy Douglas would have listened to.